This is my interview of Chris Emley. My name is Don Emley. I'm familiar with the subject of the interview. And we're doing this for the AAML History Project. And the purpose is to give some of the newer fellows insight into the background and career and stories that the fellows who have been around a little bit longer might have to offer. So away we go. Dad, why did you want to go to law school?
It's complicated. My mother always told me that I'd make a great lawyer and that lawyers were the movers and shakers in society. And she and friends of the family showered me when I was a teenager with books written by justices of the Supreme Court. And Louis Nizer, who wrote My Life in Court, loaded with enticing chapters about exciting cases he had handled. My father, on the other hand, hated lawyers. In fact, I never heard him utter the word lawyer. It was always shyster. And he had had to go through a New York divorce in the very late 1930s in order to marry my mother. And in those days, family law in New York was a lot like grand opera. Lots of falsity and hypocrisy. He had to be photographed by a so-called investigator in a hotel room on a bed with I guess, a prostitute whom he had nothing to do with. She was wearing a negligee and he was wearing pajamas, but that was enough. The one set of photographs of that was enough to prove adultery and allow his wife to get a divorce from my father. And he was an architect and sometimes got sued for construction defects and design defects. And his experience with lawyers was all bad. So I had to wait until my father was no longer alive to profess my interest in law school. At Berkeley, I had a wonderful course in international law taught by Julius Stone, one of the international greats in the philosophy of law in the 1950s, in the early 1960s. And I envisioned myself as an international law practitioner. And I guess I thought I was going to go spend my life at the United Nations or something like that. So I went to law school and discovered that international law is 98% contracts, bills of lading, disputes over who pays when the ship goes down, and stuff like that, which was, to me, mind-numbing. I got through 2 years at Hastings, which I did not enjoy after my glorious time at the university in Berkeley. And I was ready to quit law school at the end of my second year. And went to the Legal Aid Society of San Francisco and said I would offer myself for free as a clerk because I wanted to spend some time in a real law office and see whether I liked it. And it turned out that the work-study contract had just been signed, so the Legal Aid Society had to pay me. And I found out that I really enjoyed family law, working for poor people. And my third year in law school was a lot more pleasant because I had finally decided that, yes, in fact, I was going to be a lawyer. I wasn't going to be an international lawyer, but I was going to do something that was, in fact, important. Um,
What did you do when you got out of law school?
well, I already was working as a clerk for the Legal Aid Society, and they changed my category after I took the bar exam and was waiting for the results to investigator. And in 1966, the year before I graduated from law school, the US Supreme Court finally decided that juveniles were entitled to lawyers in juvenile court. So in 1967, the year I graduated from law school, the Legal Aid Society of San Francisco obtained a grant to open a juvenile court office. And that's where I was sent 2 weeks after the bar exam. And I spent the next 2 years at juvenile court. And I have to tell you, it was the most interesting part of my 55-year career in law. The dependency cases, the child abuse and neglect cases, and a few of the delinquency cases were spectacularly entertaining. So that was my first.
What's the funniest story you have from delinquency or dependency court?
Well, you've heard it over and over because it's a killer. I was at a detention hearing representing a child, a 15 or 16-year-old who was charged with armed robbery. We're talking 1968. In that courtroom, there were 9 people. One of them was black. the um, the detention hearing was like a very concise prelim and a bail hearing as well. And the victim was on the stand and he was asked if he recognized anybody in the courtroom. And he took quite a long time looking all around the courtroom, and his eyes flicked over my client 4 or 5 times and then passed on to other people like the probation officer and the bailiff and the reporter, etc. And I was just about to move to dismiss when my client said, in a voice that you could hear in San Mateo County, "Hey, that ain't the guy I robbed." And the judge stuck his gavel out, pointed it at my client and said, "You, sir, you are detained for 24 hours. Then he pointed the gavel at the probation officer, the PO, and he said, "And you have 24 hours to find the guy he robbed." And he did.
He did.
Yeah. I think that's the funniest story I had. I had another case once where I represented a mother who was accused of being somewhat rambunctious and threatening and difficult, not only with the Child Protective Services, but also with the father of her child and the child, et cetera, et cetera. I was portraying her to the referee as a misunderstood person who was just passionate about motherhood and easy to get beyond what various legal authorities considered to be perfect behavior. When she stood on the chair next to me, then got on counsel table, pulled a 38 from her pistol, started waving from her purse, started waving it around and threatening everybody that if they didn't give her son, she was going to shoot.
Yeah, she sounds passionate.
She was passionate, yes. And as one other case, I remember another detention hearing in which a very robust young man who had just been ordered detained by the judge, picked up an oak table that must have weighed 200 pounds, maybe more. It was 6 or 7 feet long and really thick. He picked it up and he threw it about 3 feet towards the judge. Fortunately, the judge was 5 feet from him. As I said, juvenile court was relatively entertaining.
So, how long did you work for the Legal Aid Society?
Until I got fired, which was 4 years after I became a lawyer. The Legal Aid Society was taken over, its budget was taken over by a group of law reformers who no longer wanted to operate any legal services offices. And when I held a press conference to announce that fact, they fired me. So 4 years into my lawyerhood, I became a private attorney all on my own with my mentor from the Legal Aid Society.
Where did you open up shop?
On Ocean Avenue, this next to the cheapest neighborhood in San Francisco for the law office, but we had a good time for a while.
You have any stories from that era of your career? What kind of cases were you getting into? Was it divorces, domestic violence?
Well, it was interesting. When we worked at the Legal Aid Society, there were many cases that we could not handle because of eligibility or because they involved work we were just not suited to do. And we would call the Bar Association of San Francisco Lawyer Referral Service, which had 3 interviewers, receptionists, telephone operators who took calls from potential clients, figured out who ought to be called on the lawyer referral service lists and sent them out. And we were asking them on a frequent basis at the Legal Aid Society to shop cases for very deserving clients who needed lawyers who could advocate for them even though they had no money. And so when my mentor and I were fired and we set up this shop of our own, the first thing we did was to call these women and tell them that we were open for business and we would handle the cases that we had been asking them to send out to people for free. And that evolved into my bar association career. We learned that the committee of the Bar Association of San Francisco that ran lawyer referral service objected to the many fee waivers that people got that we sent to these folks. And when I heard about that, I wrote a letter in protest. And the chairman of the committee that ran LRS, Jim Demetrio, invited me to come down and talk to the committee. So I went to 220 Bush, which was where the Bar Association was headquartered at the time, in the penthouse where they had a very nice bar. That's how bar associations were. Yes, that's how bar associations were organized at the time. They had a 6-bar-stool bar with a full-time bartender who was there from 11:30 in the morning until quitting time, which was pretty damn late. Anyway, I was invited into this room where 10 very I don't know, impressive senior members of the bar were seated and asked to defend my objection, and I did. And the next week, LRS changed its policy and allowed the fee waivers to occur without the humiliating demand that the chairman had made, that these potential clients come to his office and prove to him that they were without means. And then I was invited to join the committee, which I eventually became chair. The year that the Supreme Court decided that lawyers, in fact, had a First Amendment right to advertise. So the lawyer referral service lost its singular advantage, which was that it was the only bunch of lawyers in the yellow pages. And we had to scramble for a year, hire a PR firm, and figure out how to keep the lawyer referral service afloat. That was an exciting time. That was like being the CEO of a medium-sized business, something I was certainly not cut out to do.
On top of running your own practice.
Yes, that's true. Fortunately, we had hired an amazing man, Larry Long, to be the director of LRS, an openly gay man from the Midwest who was extremely adept and creative. And with him and with the PR firm that we hired, we managed to make LRS a great success, a real model for the whole state.
When did pro bono legal services become more a part of the model for the Bar Association and legal referral?
It was always there, but it was very modest. Jane Terrell was the director of LRS when I became a lawyer and went into private practice. She moved to the East Coast, and then we hired Larry Long, and Larry was a huge advocate for pro bono. And he became the driving force to make LRS expand its free legal services panel and its low fee panel, which had not existed before. And then the Volunteer Legal Services Program of the Bar Association of San Francisco, which had boasted of handling maybe 400 or 500 cases a year, hired Tanya Neiman. And she turned this sleepy, well-intentioned organization into a real dynamo. And within 2 or 3 years, she had increased its budget from $250,000 to $4 million. And she had increased the caseload that she and the Bar Association and VLSP, Volunteer Legal Services Program, could refer out from 250 to closer to 5,000. By the time she was done in the early 2000s, VLSP was referring 10,000 cases a year. I am so proud of that part of my work and of the Bar Association of San Francisco. Worldwide, it was a leader. It still is, I think, in the provision of pro bono legal services. There was a time when we could boast that there were no unrepresented litigants in family law in San Francisco if they wanted a lawyer. Unfortunately, that's decades in the past, but that was Tanya's responsibility. And pro bono became one of my main reasons for being a lawyer. Maybe it was a way for me to stay okay with my dad.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. I know you hate lawyers, Dad, but look what we're doing.
You're not a shyster.
Not a shyster. Yeah.
For the viewers who don't know, BLSP became JDC, the Justice and Diversity Center.
Now it's JDC. Yes.
It's still alive and well, and pumping out or providing lots of pro bono hours to the community in San Francisco, including in family law. And I know from personal experience that your personal participation in JDC, formerly BLSP, was a big part of your practice, even it has been and continues to be a big part of your practice, even while you've been representing high net worth clients. You devote a lot of hours to pro bono legal services, primarily through what's now known as JDC.
Yes. Now I mostly do it through something called Free Legal Answers, which is an American Bar Association program that's locally administered by the Alameda County Bar. But I'm available to JDC, and um, it's always been a matter of great pride to me that San Francisco is far more generous to indigent clients than any other place. It ain't perfect, but the judiciary and the organized bar and the huge pool of enthusiastic volunteer lawyers make a big difference in San Francisco.
Now, we're doing this interview for AAML NorCal. How did you become associated with that organization?
20 years into my practice, I knew about AAML because I had gone to its annual symposium at Golden Gate University once a year to spiff up on my continuing legal education. It was, without any question, the best purveyor of legal education, next to continuing education at the bar. But in family law in the Bay Area, AAML was paramount. So I was on a panel presentation with a few other lawyers talking about child custody litigation. And one of the panelists was Susie Thorne, a very aggressive, very successful, eminent family lawyer in San Francisco. And at the conclusion of the program, she said, "You know, Chris, you ought to apply for membership at AAML." And that was a real shock to me because I considered it to be a very exclusive organization limited to people with a lot of money. So I did what she suggested. They said they invited me to a couple of meetings, maybe 3 dinner meetings, which they held once a month. And I went. I enjoyed myself. And they said, "Okay, you can join, but it's a condition of your membership that you take the next examination for certified family law specialist." And they said, "You have 90 days to accept or reject this offer." I didn't want to be a certified specialist. I have a philosophical, political objection to specialization. I don't think that the legal profession does itself or the whole society any favor with the burgeoning proliferation of specialization and elites among the profession, lawyers with narrow perspectives and very little ability to figure what's important generally in law. So they gave me 90 days, and I didn't decide until the 89th day. But every time I had gone to one of those dinner meetings, I learned something that I didn't think I was going to find from any other group. So I accepted. I took the next specialization exam and I passed it. And I've been a specialist ever since. I still don't like the idea, but I have gotten a lot out of my membership in the Northern California chapter of AAML.
And I imagine you've gotten to contribute a lot to it as well. What have you done in your as a fellow to help the community?
Well, I've participated in a few of the practicums, helping to teach younger lawyers trial skills, and that's been actually a thrill. I also have done some presentations at symposia. One of them, of particular note, this is a long time ago when the symposium was still conducted at Golden Gate for one day rather than 3 days, full weekends out of town. And on that occasion, I organized and moderated a panel of 3 addressing the topic of the role of truth in family law. As far as the chapter was concerned, it was a big flop. I did have a psychiatrist and a judge with me on the panel. Both of them allowed as how, from their perspectives, there is no such thing as truth in family law. I started the panel presentation off by citing the Japanese classic film Rashomon, which covers the rape of a woman from 4 perspectives, each of them totally different from the perspectives of the other 3. But the panel that I had organized went downhill from there, from my point of view. I still think the truth is an important aspect of litigation in family law as well as anywhere else, and that it's not a non-starter. It's difficult to get to truth, but it's one of the reasons that we have cross-examination, which has always been my favorite part of the practice of law. Something I learned at the dinner table when I was young. My mother was one hell of a cross-examiner, and I have subjected many people to her torment over the last 55 years, and I have enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, I think we've taken up enough of your time, but is there anything else that you want to convey to the fellows of the Northern California chapter of AAML about your experience, your career, about what they ought to be considering in their practice of family law?
Yeah. From my perspective, family law is where the rubber meets the road in law. unfortunately, half of marriages in this state end in divorce. And then many people have their first, only, and most important experience of the legal system. I think that family law could be administered much more simply and in a way that is better understood by most people and not driven by vogues that drive the pendulum from one extreme to the other about child custody, about spousal support, about attorney's fees and the role of attorneys in courts. But I can't think of a field in law which is as dynamic and as inviting to practitioners as family law. I've really enjoyed 55 years, 56 years in this work. I can't think of many careers that people would like to continue doing at this stage of their lives. But this still works for me.
Right. Well, let's leave it there.